Alright everyone, it's time for a little bit of a quicker video because you saw there was a UN vote involving these 122 nations that voted to ban nuclear weapons, similar to like the chemical weapons or biological weapons ban. You see, the problem is none of the nuclear powers are actually going to disarm their nukes as a response. I was sparring with some people last night. They're like, I guess pro-globalists or maybe democratic partisans that are propaganda-addled and delusional. They're like, oh, but it's a step in the right direction. Yeah, that's like saying that dumping a pail of water over your head is a start at practicing swimming. It doesn't work that way. The UN is not empowered, not capable of actually banning anything under the sun. The only reason that chemical weapons disappeared from some nations' arms stockpiles is because they realized what a diplomatic nightmare it would be to continue fielding them. The same is true with biological weapons, which thankfully are only maintained by a handful of states. And by the way, you should be more worried about the possibility of bioterrorism than nuclear warfare at this point. You're more likely at any given time to have that sort of attack. Nuclear war may be inevitable, unfortunately, unless some massive countermeasure is developed that renders them obsolete, and I can't even imagine how terrifying that countermeasure would be. But biological weapons are more likely to be released at some point over the next maybe half century or so. If that happens, you can probably kiss your ass goodbye because it'll be like Mask of the Red Death or a Return to the Black Plague or something. It's always very colorful when they describe plagues. You know, you get a. Are we gonna have the Azure plague next? People turn blue because they start suffocating because their lungs fill with fluid. Who knows? Anyway, though, it was funny. The Netherlands actually voted no, which means that the Dutch people now have my respect as being the sane ones in Europe for being the only ones to realize, hey, this isn't actually gonna work. It's pointless to vote yes on this idea. Like the UN is gonna march in to Washington, D.C. or Moscow and say, okay, we banned nuclear weapons now, so by next week we expect you to have them all out here. We'll pick them up and go and dispose of them. Yeah, that's really going to happen. The U.S. and Russia and China and everybody else, they're going to unilaterally disarm their nuclear programs in order to, because these other nations that don't have nukes are pissed off that we do. No, it's not going to happen. You see, here's the problem. This is like a group of people who are disarmed, telling somebody with a machine gun, hey, we banned guns, you got to give up the gun. It's like a democratic process. It doesn't work that way. The nuclear states of the world don't have to worry about what the non-nuclear states think about their nuclear stockpiles because they don't have nuclear weapons. It's one of the big paradoxes within the nuclear question. It's like mutually assured destruction. How do you de-escalate and get rid of nuclear weapons unless your opponent will? And then if everyone does get rid of nuclear weapons, and then there's no longer a nuclear power to be a check on the world, anybody else may randomly, in secret, develop such a program. Therein lies the problem. There is no way to put the genie back in the bottle. We are in now the atomic era. We will remain in the atomic era until some weapon that's even more terrifying is developed and capable of overriding the checks and balances of mutually assured destruction. We're talking some nation develops 99% effective anti-air, anti-missile systems, which, by the way, would trigger a nuclear war if a nation did develop them because the other side would immediately launch a preemptive strike. They don't want to be enslaved and disarmed and have one empire controlling the whole world in a military fashion. It's just what would happen. Reagan realized this. By the way, to those who think, oh, well, that doesn't make any sense, Ronald Reagan alluded to it. During his chat with Mondale, during, I believe, it was the second debate in the mid-1980s, said, oh, well, if we developed a means to destroy all nuclear weapons that were incoming, yeah, we'd share that tech with the Soviets. It's not lethal technology. And hopefully this would take care of the nuclear problem because everyone would be safeguarded again. The real reason has nothing to do with wanting to spare Soviet citizens. I mean, do you think that fucking Ronald Reagan actually cared about their lives? Or did he just play the kindly grandpa character on TV every night for a bunch of yuppies? The latter. He didn't care. He would have wiped out every single person in the Soviet Union out if he had had a chance to do it without retaliation. Trust me. Here's the thing, though. It would have started a nuclear war if we had developed such technology and not shared it, because the USSR immediately would have struck us before we could fully implement it in hopes of destabilizing us. They would rather everyone in the USSR dies and everyone in the US dies than just everyone in the USSR dies, because you'd have to believe in the benevolence of your opponent towards you in order to give up the weapons and let them continue to have nukes. Which is what would happen. Yeah, the US would easily backstab the other nuclear powers. So would all of them. Don't let them fool you, even the most pacifistic. We're talking probably the UK. Even they would gladly nuke a bunch of other countries off the face of the earth if they could do so without retaliation. Don't let them kid you with all their highbrow-sounding morality when they're speaking at the UN and condemning nuclear weapons or genocide or any of these other things. The only thing preventing these things routinely from happening is a multipolar world with nuclear weapons in it. That's what's safeguarding the stability of the world, like it or not. Now then, how else can MAD break down? Well, at some point, one of the nuclear powers goes after one of the proxy states of another nuclear power, and the other nuclear power then has two choices. Retaliate in a military fashion, threatening nuclear war, which probably it escalates to, or do nothing and show themselves to be cowards, in which case the other nuclear power can do whatever the fuck it wants in the other nation's sphere and form an empire. Because they no longer have to worry about retaliation, because they know that they're too chicken to press the little red button. Now, there's some problems with mutually assured destruction. Let's hope that no situation arises that tests its very core fabric. Because if it does, we could end up with a nuclear war just from that. Not even with anyone meaning to. Could be a side issue of importance. Has nothing to do with nuclear weapons at its center. But having a bunch of nations... Do you think anyone cares if Malawi or Bhutan or Albania or Panama dislike the fact that the US and Russia and China and the UK and France, Pakistan, India, North Korea and Israel have nuclear weapons? No, well, they can't do anything about it. Here, look at this situation. North Korea is guilty of the most total human rights abuses you could possibly imagine. Their economy is tiny. Their overall military capability is actually fairly lackluster. Lots of manpower, lots of weapons, but they're really old. They have a very small number of primitive atomic weapons that can't even be put on a missile. And yet nobody wants to do anything about them because they have a handful of primitive atomic weapons. So the world community isn't clamoring for invading and liberating them and disarming them of these atomic weapons, right? Then how much more do you think they would be reluctant to actually put any weight on the US or Russia or China that have hundreds, and in the US and Russia's cases, thousands of active post-megaton nuclear weapons? Or even a state like Pakistan or India, a couple hundred relatively small weapons, you know, basic boosted fission. They don't even have true multi-stage systems. They're not going to deal with that. There's nothing they can do. Yeah, like the Nepal invades India with the cause to disarm atomic program. We can't maintain this anymore, say Hindus and Buddhists of Nepal, as they worry about Armageddon and karmic retribution. It's not gonna happen. It's like the Orthodox Church says, oh, Russia should disarm because we think that killing God's children is a bad idea. You're never gonna have it work. The US, France, and the UK have all come out and said, no, we're not interested in this. We're not going to do any. You can't ban our nuclear programs unilaterally. You don't have the ability because you don't have nuclear weapons. It's not going to happen. Right now, the best we can hope for is that nukes don't proliferate to more nations, especially those that are tend towards instability. I would say certainly at the top of the list would be anywhere in Western Europe right now. I'd be more worried at this point about Germany attempting to acquire nuclear weapons from France as part of some EU army deal. I would be 10,000 times more worried about that than Iran or Syria developing nuclear weapons, or the North Koreans developing boosted fission. I would be much more worried if Germany developed them. And you should be too, by the way. Now, the seed of all evil in Europe rearing its ugly head again in order to browbeat all of its neighbors into accepting essentially Merkelite rule of law. Yeah, it's a problem. But no, the UN ban on atomic weapons. I'm sure that's going to do something. It's like someone walks. Let's say you're carrying a rifle and someone who's totally disarmed, like naked and wretched, like Gollum. They say, "Oh, you need to give up your rifle because it's the right thing to." Bullshit. Like you can force them to do that. No, you can't. Not unless you stab them in the back with a sharp rock or something like that. Maybe. I wouldn't be surprised. Some of these other nations would love to stab the nuclear states in the back. Bullshit, though. You're not going to get the chance to do that. The retaliation would be swift, and you'd all be dead. There's nothing you can do about it. What you should be doing is looking. If these nations really took the idea seriously of not wanting a nuclear war, not wanting nuclear proliferation, they should be attempting to not to piss off Russia or the United States, but to like draw us into conversation. Like instead of constantly browbeating our president and constantly rambling about how bad Russia is and constantly rambling about the Trident program in the UK, why aren't you sitting back and letting us just be friendly with each other so that we don't get another full Cold War going on? By the way, your big problem is really India, Pakistan, and China over their disputed borders. That's the biggest flashpoint for atomic weapons right now. And none of you even realize it. Because you don't know what's going on. You think the UN's going to save you. The UN's never saved anybody. UN comes into a country that's been destabilized. People know shit has hit the fan and it's going to keep hitting the fan until they're totally painted with their own feces. That's what the UN accomplishes. It'll come in and run drugs, abuse some prostitutes, enslave a few children, graft off of the money they're supposedly giving to the local government. The local government will get corrupt too, and there'll be more drugs and more like sex crime, and then the UN leaves after it fills its pockets. That's what that's what the blue hats really do in a country. They're ineffectual, they're poorly trained, they're totally inept. That's about all. Peace out.